Starting off this countdown, we have the baboon human. In October of 1984, Stephanie Faye Beauclair, otherwise known as Baby Faye, was born with hypoplastic left heart syndrome, meaning the left side of her heart did not grow properly. Sadly, no human heart donor could be found, so they decided to give her the heart of a baboon. In fact, she was the first infant who got a heart from an animal, and at this time, no infant had successfully received a heart transplant, even with a human heart. But it worked for Baby Faye. Sadly, she lived for less than a month before passing away.
Number 9. The HOFLING Hospital Experiment. This experiment happened all the way back in 1966, so a bit more recent, in a time where the rules of psychological experiments, well, didn't really exist. Really. I was gonna say they were kind of loose, but no, they were not really a thing at all. Because of this, the nurses that were all part of this experiment had no idea that they were participants, which nowadays is totally illegal, very illegal. The night nurse would receive a phone call during the shift, and on the other end would be Dr. Smith, who's actually the researcher in this scenario. He would ask the nurses to check the medical cabinet to see if they had a drug called astrotin, which was actually a drug that was made up for this experiment, and it was actually just a placebo, so don't worry too much. The astrogen would clearly state the maximum dosage of 10 milligrams, but Dr. Smith would ask the nurses to administer 20 milligrams. They were told that the doctor was in a hurry and he would sign the papers later and all that jazz. This just had to get done that night. This had to be delivered to the patient ASAP. If the nurse decided to give the patient the drug, they would be breaking 3 rules. They're not allowed to accept instructions over the phone, the dose was double the maximum limit stated on the box, and the medicine itself was unauthorized. Big 2. And it was not on the ward stock list, so it shouldn't be used in the hospital in the first place. Big 3 red flags right there. Out of the 22 unknowing nurse participants, 21 of them went to administer this. Yeah, big oof on that one. Yikes. To be fair, that's the entire point of this test. This is nothing towards the nurses. I'm not ripping on them at all. I mean, this was 1966. We didn't know quite a bit back in the day, you know what I mean? This really showed the pressure nurses are put under randomly in the middle of the night, if anything. Number 8. UCLA schizophrenia experiment. Starting in 1983, UCLA researchers Michael Gitlin and Keith Neutraline went to great and pretty unethical lengths just to see how people who are suffering from schizophrenia relapse. Yeah, basically they're trying to figure out if there is a way to predict the relapse, or a psychosis episode of some sorts. Now, sounds like a good idea on paper, I guess, but the way you go about things, historically, come on, we could have done a lot better. Unfortunately, this experiment involved recruiting hundreds of participants who were all being treated for schizophrenia at the time, and then just taking them off their meds completely. Yeah, as I said that, you at home probably went, ooh, yeah, that's exactly right. What a horrible idea. Like, we're going the opposite way here. We're not supposed to do this, right? There was no suitable plan in order for when they could return to their medication. And they also didn't do a good job making sure these patients were actually safe during these experiments. They're like, yeah, let's just take people off their meds, see what happens. It's horrible, it's one of the worst. Unfortunately, the results were as bad as you thought and proved to be fatal when one of the participants, Antonio Lamadrid, ended up taking his own life. Again, not sure what we expected here in this sense. An article from 1994 also said the doctors failed to get proper consent from the patients as well. Just a cherry on top of this horrible experiment. Just when you thought it couldn't get worse. There you go. Number 7. Psychic driving. British psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron is to blame for this one. Remember that name. Don't listen to anything he says. He created the psychic driving concept that the CIA found interesting, to say the least. Basically, psychic driving was a procedure that subjects patients to a continuous, repeated audio loop of something that's intended to change their behavior. Just the same line or the same whatever over and over thousands of times. And through the course of their treatment, they would also be paralyzed while being exposed to the loop message. Yeah, the worst thing ever, right? So the CIA heard about this and started sending money to fund Cameron's experiments, but he actually didn't know it was coming from the CIA because they used a fake name. Classic CIA. Cameron would subject patients to paralytics and electroconvulsive therapy, stronger than usual as well, just to make things worse, just at a horrible limit. The experiments were mostly conducted on patients who entered the institute for more common problems like anxiety disorders or postpartum depression, and ended up leaving with permanent effects from his actions. These included things like amnesia, being unable to speak. Some people forgot their parents' names and thought that the interrogators were actually their real parents. Just horrible things. Their minds were just so confused. Brutal stuff. Number 6. Go pills. Here in Toronto, we have go trains, go buses, but not go pills. Not yet. Hopefully not ever, actually. Yeah, move over 5-hour energy. We got some competition on the horizon. Staying awake is challenging, even when you're doing something you absolutely enjoy, like watching a movie. You'll still fall asleep. It just happens, we're human. My dad fell asleep at a theater once in the moving chairs. I couldn't believe it. Guy's 3D glasses were falling off of his face. I was in shock. But he works a lot. He works crazy hours, he's older. That's where Go pills were supposed to come in handy. Workers who have these long shifts and work late hours to pay the bills. This pill was supposed to keep you up for 40 hours straight, so a bit much, I'd say. The US Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, or DARPA, which is much less air coming out of my mouth, is currently funding this pill. But what if it's mistreated? I can't even begin to imagine the negative effects something like this could have on people. We could barely handle Tide Pods as a community. You know what I mean? It's kind of a bad idea, I vote. Number 5. The MILGRAM experiment. When learning about our past in further detail, like the Trinity test for example, and how that led to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's important to understand why these things happened and why these people did this, or more so how people are influenced into doing these horrible things historically, especially in large numbers. So the MILGRAM experiment was put in place to get an idea. How far will people go when it comes to obeying instructions, specifically if it involves a third party being hurt? Well, Stanley Milgram, Yale psychologist, created this test. There's 3 important roles for this one. You need the teacher, the experimenter, and the learner. The learner is disguised as the main test subject, but really, they're actually in on the whole thing. The real subject is over here. The teacher, the one administering pain to the test subjects. So they're told by this higher figure, whoever, to keep upping the pain every time they get a question wrong. They're like the rule maker. So the real test here is to see how far humans will go when hurting others under direct authority. It's important to note that the subject also isn't actually getting shocked at all. Again, they're in on it. They play it up. They play it up more and more just to see what's going on. These tests were underway in 1961 in a basement at Yale University. In college, I did improv. That's wild. That's a wild after-school curricular activity. Number 4, Unit 731. The Imperial Japanese Army's Unit 731 conducted some pretty horrible experiments during World War II that certainly are going to shock anyone who learns about them. This is wild. This definitely belongs on this list. The experiments were meant to be done as a way to prepare for biological warfare, but the process was horrible and extremely inhumane, as are most of these things. Different medical schools and universities all provided doctors and other research staff to help conduct these experiments. Big group effort, nice, way to go guys. They used both prisoners and civilians as test subjects. There were a bunch of different experiments that were conducted during this time, some of which involved injecting them with pathogens like cholera or anthrax, or operations with just no anesthesia, just weapon testing, all painful stuff, really the worst of the worst. Number 3, MK Ultra. We have to include a mind control project. Do you believe in mind control? Some claim they're born with it, like an X-Men, so if that's you, you know where to meet. MK Ultra, where do I start? Okay, it was originally a secret CIA project that lasted from 1953 to 1973, where they ran hundreds of experiments to US citizens. They gave them hallucinogens in an attempt to crack mind control, or sorry, as they called it, information gathering. Yeah, it's like what Apple says. Oh, we're just gathering information. Yeah, okay. In the 50s and 60s, around the Cold War, the United States believed that the Soviets, Chinese, and or North Korean agents were all using mind control in the war. That was their best explanation towards these brainwashed prisoners of war in Korea at the time. Yeah, it's gotta be brainwashing, nothing else, right? Horrible tests were being conducted in universities, hospitals, and again, in prisons. The happenings of these projects weren't fully known to the public until years after it ended. It was a huge, horrible secret. The agency destroyed most MK documents back in 1973 when it officially ended, so we think we know, when in reality we probably know little to nothing what actually occurred. Number 2, the Stanford Prison Experiment. Perhaps the most famous psychological experiment gone wrong. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Let's talk about it. It started August 14th, 1971. It was led by university psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. Again, another university study. My gosh. I mean, to be fair, Hogwarts was also messed up, but Hogwarts wasn't real now, was it? The Stanford Prison Experiment was very real. The experiment took volunteers and divided them into 2 groups. One group of prisoners and one group of guards. And they placed all these volunteers into a fake prison that was created for the experiment, okay? The experiment aimed to see if and how quickly humans would turn evil, under the right conditions of course, with the right amount of power. Yeah, pretty twisted, right? It's basically a group version of the Milgram experiment. It was a test to try and answer the question of if humans are inherently good or inherently evil. And after just 6 days, we found out. Yeah, 6 days later, the experiment needed to be concluded because the guards began absolutely tormenting the prisoners in the worst ways possible. It really showed the kinds of things humans can be capable of, even after just a short amount of time, less than a week. And humans are like, oh, I'll be evil. And finally, coming in number 1, facial expressions experiment. Yep, a wild one to close her off. The facial expressions experiment. Okay, back in 1924, a psychologist with, you guessed it, the University of Minnesota, classic university stuff, he wanted to conduct an experiment to study facial expressions, right? Sounds pretty harmless so far, dare I say sounds a little silly. More specifically, he wanted to see if everyone's expressions of emotions were all the exact same. Does happiness look the same on everybody? Does sadness? What about fear or shock, disgust, anger? What about those? So he recruited some volunteers from campus and then painted the lines of their facial muscles black. And then he exposed each participant to different stimuli in order to photograph their reactions. He wanted to compare all these results side by side. The stimuli at hand was intense. This guy wanted big reactions. He included showing them adult films, he exposed them to ammonia, he made them touch reptiles, and of course horrible things that I can't talk about here on the tube of you. You know what I mean? Horrible, horrible stuff. All in the name of facial expressions. What an awful experiment. What a dark one.
Starting off this countdown, we have the wholphin. Take a guess at what two animals were bred for this one. If you guessed a whale and a dolphin, you're correct. A wholphin is a mix between an Atlantic bottlenose dolphin and a false killer whale. The first recorded wholphin was born in 1981 in Tokyo SeaWorld, but sadly he only lived to around 6 months. Probably a prime example of why they shouldn't exist in the first place. Another wholphin was later born at a sea life park in Hawaii in 1985, but she had trouble reproducing and all her babies sadly passed away. In our 9th spot today we have the human mouse. Mice are constantly being experimented on in labs. This time, scientists in Japan tried to create a human mouse. Basically, they injected a mouse with human stem cells. They did this in an attempt to grow a human pancreas in the animal, but due to backlash, they have certain rules in place. At any point during the experiment, if the mouse is said to start developing a human-type brain, then it has to be killed and the experiments have to stop. Thank gosh though, because I'm not trying to have the world ruled by weird mutant human mice. No thank you. In our 8th spot today we have the mice with human brain. So I know I just finished saying how the mice were killed if any human DNA was found in the brain, but in 2005, a professor at Stanford University was given permission to create a mouse-human hybrid. He did so by transplanting human brain stem cells into the brains of mice. Now, the main goal of his experiment was to be able to study neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease. Now, the first couple of rounds did not go so well. They found less than 1% of human cells in the rodent's brain. But by 2010, they found success. That's when they managed to, and I quote, use mouse stem cells to develop sensory hair cells which could combat human hearing loss. They also managed to make the mice more human, as in the mice with the human brain cells were far more intelligent than the other mice. In our 7th spot, we have the HUMANZEE. Over the years, a number of scientists have run some wild tests on chimpanzees. Now, what makes these mammals of interest to them is because of how similar they are to humans. Humans and chimps share 98.8% of their DNA, hence why scientists are trying to make a chimp-human hybrid. Ilya Ivanov was the first person to attempt to create a human-chimp hybrid. Ilya continued these experiments until the 1920s. During that time, the Soviet Union was also running the same experiments. In 2019, rumor has it that a team of researchers from the Salk Institute for Biological Studies in the US successfully produced the first human-monkey chimeras. So yeah, I don't really know how I feel about that. I don't know. In our 6th spots we have the KUNGA. In the early 2000s, when scientists unearthed the KUNGA skeletons in northern Syria, they had no idea what they were looking at. The skeletons looked like they belonged to horses, but they dated back to 2600 BC, and domestic horses wouldn't appear in the region for another 500 years, so they were a bit confused. Then they realized that this wasn't a horse, it was a human-bred animal. In fact, this animal was a cross between a donkey and a wild ass. Apparently, back then they were highly valuable and very expensive. Now, it's believed that these kungas were created for warfare, because not only could they pull wagons, but it was believed that they would be tougher. The thing with donkeys is that they would get scared easily and they didn't need their donkeys running off mid-battle. But the wild asses, no one could tame them. So then they would breed them together and bam, it created an animal more desirable for them. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the human-pig hybrid. The whole crossing humans with animal thing definitely creeps me out, but this one isn't what you think. They aren't creating a creature that is half human and half pig. Thank gosh, at least not yet. Instead, they are using the pigs to grow human organs inside of them instead of having patients wait for a donor. The first experiment was run in 2017, and an embryo was placed in an adult pig for 4 weeks. Then it was taken out to analyze, and the embryo survived and contained some human cells. Now they are going to figure out if pig embryos can handle enough human cells to create full human organs. However, a lot of people are against these experiments, saying that it is highly unethical. In our 4th spot, we have the dogs. A number of the dog breeds that you love have been severely crossbred, and when dog breeders get overcome by greed, they start to care more about money than they do about their dog's health. Take a look at this dog right here. This is a dog that suffers from short spine syndrome. You can see it has a squished body, huge jaw, and a really bad underbite. The dog was born from backyard breeding. The breeder was carelessly breeding a bunch of his dogs together. And this is the result, which is heartbreaking to see. And most of the time, these dogs are put down as no one wants to adopt them. Coming in at number 3, we have the virus Chimera. In 2017, Portuguese researchers decided to mess around with a mouse virus to create a chimera virus. Basically, a mouse virus with a human viral gene. Now, you're probably concerned like me, because I read this and I'm like, oh, they're trying to create another outbreak or something. But no, apparently this allows them to study viruses and how it impacts the rodent's body. But I will say that accidental outbreaks have occurred. In our 2nd spot, we have the rabbit-human mix. In 2003, a team of scientists in Shanghai managed to fuse human cells with rabbit eggs. In the United States, scientists have been trying to do the same thing, but their attempts were always unsuccessful. Move over, American scientists, the one in Shanghai beat you to it. Now, this experiment was done to see if it can be used to grow cells or tissues for transplant patients. However, this experiment also had strict rules, and once the rabbit had human cells in its brain, it had to be destroyed. So they only let the human rabbit develop for a couple of days before they killed it and harvested it for stem cells. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the human demon sheep. Now, this is gonna keep you up at night for sure. In 2017, villagers in South Africa were horrified when a sheep gave birth to something that didn't look like a lamb, okay? In fact, it looked eerily human-like. As a result, people in the village were freaking out, saying that whatever was born was done by the works of the devil. In fact, rumor has it that this lamb was created from someone injecting the sheep with human sperm. Now, the lamb was stillborn, so it wasn't born alive. But still, how creepy is that? And many people in the village were convinced that beasts and or witchcraft were behind this creature. Starting off this countdown, we have the rat pigs. The Salk Institute for Biological Studies in the US has been known to run a number of crossbreeding experiments. One was performed on rats and pigs. The team of scientists decided to take stem cells from rats and inject them into pig blastocysts. However, this failed, and I mean, I'm not surprised. Rats and pigs have different gestation times, and genetically they are very different. But imagine a pig that looked like a rat. Okay, that is terrifying. In our 9th spot today, we have the horse human. And this one is going to ruin your day completely. In 2001, a man was caught trying to inject human sperm into a horse. He had done this to about 6 horses until he was caught by police and arrested. Thankfully, none of the horses got pregnant. But ew, imagine if they did? Woo. In our 8th spot, we have the Iron Age pig. Now take a look at this porker, he is a chunky guy. The Iron Age pig is a cross between a domestic pig and a wild boar. Now something about that cross just does not sit right with me. Now people like breeding these pigs because they can get a lot of meat out of them or just sell them for a lot. But they are considered very hostile animals. This is due to the fact that wild boars are typically more aggressive, and that's a dominant trait that gets passed along to their offspring. Moving on to number 7, we have the infertile pink bollworm. The pink bollworms are invasive pests that lay eggs on cotton balls, and then once they hatch, the larvae eat the seeds and damage the cotton fibers. In 2005, the situation became so bad that scientists were like, okay, we gotta figure out a solution here. So they decided to create sterile pink bollworms. They did this by treating a bunch of moths with radiation. The radiation would damage their reproductive cells, but it wouldn't kill them. That way, when they encountered a normal pink bollworm and the two mated, bam, it would create an infertile pink bollworm. So for 4 years, 2 billion pink bollworm moths that were treated with radiation were released into Arizona's cotton fields. They literally would fly an airplane above the fields and just drop millions of these moths down onto the crops. And it worked. It helped with the bollworm problem. But imagine if their plan didn't work. That could have gone really bad and damaged entire cotton fields. Coming in at number 6, we have the sheep with human livers. In 2007, scientists at the University of Nevada, Reno managed to grow human livers inside of a sheep. They did this by injecting human stem cells from bone marrow into sheep fetuses. Now, they chose sheep as their test subjects because their circulatory system is very similar to ours. In the end, they managed to create livers made with 20% human cells. They are hopeful that one day this can be used to help grow human organs for those in need of a transplant inside these animals. But anything done with animals is highly controversial, especially when it has to do with injecting them with human DNA and stuff. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the cows. I swear, no animal is safe out there, okay? Not even cows. In 2008, British researchers were given the okay to conduct some human-animal experiments. As part of the experiment, they decided to manipulate cow eggs. So they took the nucleus of the cow egg, which has the source of the most DNA, and they replaced it with the nucleus of a human cell to create a growing embryo. They then watched the egg develop and multiply. Scientists could then extract the stem cells from this. They hope that one day they can use the stem cells in disease treatments. Moving on to number 4, we have the Jeep. And I'm not talking about the car Jeep, we're talking GEEP, okay? A mixture between a goat and a sheep. Now, these animals are adorably cute, but sadly, breeding the two can be a very risky game. Very few babies are actually carried to term, and even few manage to survive birth. Those that do often have a bunch of genetic abnormalities. But people still cross them together, which is just sad, because you're breeding animals destined for failure, and for what reason? Moving on to number 3, we have the JAGLION. Can you guys guess what this animal is a mix between? It's kinda obvious. It's a mix between a jaguar and a lion. But these animals are actually naturally born, which is wild. Like, I just can't imagine a jaguar and a lion getting it on. So it first started when a lion and a jaguar coexisted in the same zoo together. They were raised together and, well, one thing led to another, bada bing bada boom, mama lion became preggo. I shared this love story in another video, but it's so cute but also sad, but I just want to share it again. So there once was a jaguar named Diablo and a lion named Lola. The two were raised side by side and they were inseparable. When Lola got mature though, they kept Diablo away from her so that they wouldn't mate. But whenever they were apart, both animals got depressed. It got so bad to the point where Lola wouldn't even eat. So they brought them back together and they were happy and eating and thriving again. You can't keep true love apart. And obviously one thing did lead to another and they did end up mating and they had 2 JAGLION babies together. And they all lived happily ever after. Coming in at number 2, we have the goat human. I can't with this one. Okay? I just can't. But this image right here is said to be a picture of a human goat baby. Story goes that in 2016 in Alabama, of all places, a goat gave birth to an odd-looking baby. In fact, its kid looked very human-like, so it's said that this goat was actually the product of a human getting it on with a goat. I know, it's disgusting. It's disgusting. I threw up in my mouth a little when I read that, but again, this is just a rumor. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the hybrid lions. Now, this is actually a very sad example of crossbreeding gone wrong. In 2006, nearly 24 crossbred lions in northern India were dying after they developed a mysterious disease. The disease was a result of inbreeding and a weakened gene pool. Basically, they didn't know this, but they kept breeding lions that all had this weakened mutant gene, and nearly 80 lions were affected by this. The lions being born had weak hind legs and had difficulty walking, and they couldn't run at all. They also had failing immune systems and they weren't living too long. But the worst part was that they let these animals suffer. There's a wildlife law in India which prohibits the killing of animals. So basically, they had to just wait for these lions to die a slow, painful death on their own. It's a very tragic case of breeding gone wrong.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the aviator suit. When it comes to new ideas and new inventions, it almost seems messy at first, all the time. It's always a horrible start. And today's list is quite messy, a lot of horrible experiments done with groups of unaware subjects. To kick this grim one off, we'll look back to the early 1900s. We'll start with Franz Reichelt, a known inventor of the time. He invented his own version of a wearable aviator suit. It was a parachute. It was made of 320 square feet of fabric. It wasn't light at all. And in 1912, Franz wanted to test this new invention out in public, but instead of using a dummy and throwing that off the Eiffel Tower, Franz wanted to be brave and he strapped himself in. And the rest is history. Dark, horrible, fast history.
Number 9 on this list is reptile hearts. Let me paint you the picture here, folks. You're chilling out at your home, everything is good. It's just a typical day in your 59-year-old male life. Boom, your chest starts to feel a bit strange, then it starts to get worse. The pains are significant right now and you think, holy mother of God, am I having a heart attack? You rush to the hospital just praying that you make it there in time and that your heart can hold on until then. You get there, but once you do, you get a very surprising report. The good news is that you aren't suffering from a heart attack and that death isn't totally imminent. The bad news is that you're slowly turning into a snake. Well, at least your heart is doing that. This is literally exactly what happened to a 59-year-old man. How this happened, why this happened, and what we can do to prevent it are all things that doctors truly don't know. In truth, this was only the second time that this has ever reportedly happened. Now, it's very possible that it's happened to other people and just hasn't been reported yet, but either way, it's still super rare. Being a snake would definitely be pretty cool, but I think I'd like to stick with my human heart if that's alright. Number 8 on this list is multiple breasts. Having 2 breasts is honestly a pretty unique human thing. Think about all of the other mammals out there that have way more than that. Back in the day, it's believed that we would have evolved from creatures that had way more than 2 breasts. So why did this go away? Well, there really just wasn't any reason to have more than 2. Cats, for instance, have more than that, but they also give birth to multiple offspring at a time, so there's an actual purpose for having them. Humans typically give birth to 1 other human at a time, and in very rare cases, 2. Therefore, having more than 2 breasts just really doesn't make any evolutionary sense. However, the genes are there, we've done it before, and that's why, in rare cases, sometimes it happens again. What's kind of strange is that this mutation is way more common in men than it is in women. And because it's way more common in men, these additional breasts often go unnoticed. The women that do end up with this mutation typically have these extra breasts removed. They can't really decide where these things pop up, and having a breast growing in your armpit has got to be pretty uncomfortable. Number 7 on this list is ectrodactyly. This is commonly known as a split hand or split foot mutation. Middle fingers or middle toes will usually be affected, and in some individuals, literally all 4 hands and feet can be hit with it. This sucks for everybody who has to deal with it, but especially those who have all their limbs affected. It's gotta be brutal. Think about having to walk around or grab things like this. You can't. You wouldn't be able to. How are you supposed to drive a car or text on a phone or literally walk properly if it's your feet that are affected? This should affect people at birth, so if you don't have it right now, then you should be okay. Number 6 on this list is the Proteus syndrome. Proteus syndrome is a rare condition which will affect your bones, your skin, your muscles, and literally all other tissues in the body. This mutation is really very scary, and I feel for those who it affects. Basically, parts of your body will grow at a proportion to the rest of your body. This mutation is also asymmetric, so you may have your left leg get really big, but your right leg stays at a normal size. This syndrome can also affect literally any part of your body too. Your face, nostrils, legs, arms, ears. you name it, and if you have this mutation, they might just get really big. This mutation obviously makes it very difficult for those individuals to live everyday normal lives and will often be struggling with it forever. It also makes it far more likely to develop tumors and some skin conditions that your everyday individuals usually don't need to worry as much about. If you're watching this video and you don't already have it, then you're probably good unless you're between the ages of 6 months and 18 months. That's when you typically notice the growth, and from there on out, it's just going to continue with age. Number 5 on this list is hypertrichosis. Ever wondered what it's like to be the teen wolf? Well, if you develop this mutation, then this is probably as close as you're going to be able to get. Basically, this mutation is excessive hair growth. We're talking like serious levels of hair here, guys. Not just a scruffy beard, but full-on locks growing out of your cheeks and everything. For a very long time, you'd often see people who had this disease working in the circus. Julia Pastrana is one of the most famous ones. She was born in Mexico in 1834 and made a name for herself in the circus community, becoming a performer and showing off her mutation. And honestly, shout out Julia. I have to imagine that it's very difficult being born with something like that, but Julia went out there, made the best out of a bad situation, so honestly, solid respect. Number 4 on this list is UNER syndrome. So this mutation is super specific, and right now the scientific community is still trying to decide whether it's an actual mutation or if people are just trying to punk us. Let me explain. UTS is a syndrome that was proposed by the Turkish evolutionary biologist UNER after studying 5 members of the Ulis family in rural Turkey. These individuals all walked on all fours, all used primitive speech, and appeared to have congenital brain impairment. It's very strange though, because nobody really knows why this happened. That's why some people in the scientific community have come out and talked about how genetics have absolutely nothing to do with it. But if genetics do have something to do with this, and this is a mutation, then it sounds to me like humans are straight up devolving, losing all connection to our human characteristics and getting closer to dogs or other 4-legged animals. I don't know, guys, this is a weird one. Let me know in the comments what you guys think it could be. Number 3 on this list is FIBRODYSPLASIA ossificans progressiva. Wow, alright, that was a mouthful. Well, for simplicity's sake, and so I don't embarrass myself anymore by mispronouncing this thing, we're gonna call this FOP from here on out. FOP is a very dangerous and rare condition that you do not want to get. This mutation literally causes your muscles and tissues to start to calcify and ultimately turn into bones. Yeah, you heard that right, guys. You literally start to become just a bone. Basically a statue with skin over top of it. As you can imagine, movement can become very limited when you have this mutation, and you'll have some other health issues arise as well. Breathing can be difficult, and it can also become difficult to speak or eat. And that leads to other major problems that I don't even want to get into. This one is scary as all holy hell and really makes me appreciate the ability to move around. Number 2 on this list is TRIMETHYLAMINURIA. Wow, I swear whoever came up with these names is literally just doing it to mess with us, guys. Alright, this mutation is definitely the stinkiest on this list. People who develop this mutation just literally can't break down certain smells. Their body is incapable, and therefore these smells just sort of come off of their bodies at all times. Sadly, it's not rose petals or apple pie either. Of course, it has to be smells like rotten eggs, garbage, urine. Just absolutely gross smells that will be so overtly pungent that everybody in the room is going to be able to smell it. The worst part is, it doesn't matter how much the person showers or douses themselves in deodorant, they're not going to be able to get rid of this smell. And finally, number 1 on this list is alien hand syndrome. I think that this one is by far the scariest thing on this list, guys. Alien hand syndrome is a mutation where you're literally no longer in control of one of your hands. Your brain can no longer control what your hand does, and it just sort of acts as if it's got a mind on its own. I can't even imagine how scary that would be. Like, imagine you're just driving your car and this alien limb just starts punching you in the sack. That's game over, dude. Like, there's no coming back from that. And this can happen at any age, and usually it comes after a stroke or some other deep trauma. So just kind of cross your fingers that your hand doesn't decide to go haywire on you. Number 10 on this list is human tails. If we take a look at the animal kingdom, tails are a pretty common thing. In fact, most birds, mammals, reptiles, and even fish have tails. Humans, however, for the most part, don't. Well, most of us anyways. There is a rare mutation that humans could be born with an actual tail. It's actually believed that very early on, as a baby is being developed in the womb, there will be a tail attached to this child. It's a very small thing that will go away, but for some humans, it never does. This makes a lot of sense because it's believed that humans evolved from creatures that would have had tails. In fact, pretty much all monkeys have tails, so it makes sense that at one point or another, we also would have had these little things poking out of our backside. Unlike a lot of other entries on this list, this mutation isn't necessarily super dangerous. For most people, they go on to live totally normal lives just with a tiny little tail. Obviously, it's gotta be pretty bloody annoying though, because I feel like your entire life you'd just be perpetually sitting on your own tail, which would kinda suck. But there could also be some cool things with this too. Some people actually have the capability to move their own tail. Like they actually have control over the full thing. I don't think that they can swing off of trees or anything like that, but still, moving a tail around would definitely make for a pretty neat party trick.
In our 9th spot, we have the HUMANZEE attempts. In 1967, scientists in China were working on creating a human-chimp mix. Sadly, not much information about these experiments have been disclosed to the public. But rumor has it that the experiments didn't really work. They wanted to basically create a chimp that could talk fluently in whatever language it was taught. Then in 1981, they tried this experiment again. They impregnated a female chimpanzee with human sperm. Turns out, the chimp did manage to get pregnant by it, but sadly passed away 3 months later due to complications. Coming in at number 8, we have the rat mouse. Scientists at the Salk Institute have found a way to grow the pancreatic tissue of a mouse inside of a rat. The mouse pancreas was able to grow inside of rats successfully. So they grew these new pancreases from mouse stem cells that were then placed in the bodies of the rats. And then when the pancreases were complete, they transplanted them back into the mice. Now the biggest thing about this experiment is that this technique could reverse diabetes in the mice. So they hope that one day they can grow organs inside the bodies of different animals, and then you transplant those organs into humans to cure diabetes. Of course, there's still so much work to be done on this. The last thing they want is to grow a human organ inside of an animal and then have the recipient's body reject it. In our 7th spot, we have the killer bees. Did you know that killer bees were accidentally created by scientists? If they're out here creating bees that threaten the ecosystem, then who's to say they won't create animals that do the same? Basically, this all started in the 1950s. A biologist was commissioned by the Brazilian government to create a species of bees that would increase honey production. But along the way, things went wrong. The biologist himself didn't have much experience with animal breeding. In the end, bees from southern Africa and local Brazilian honeybees mated and it produced these angry killer bees. And then of course, thousands of these bees just accidentally escaped. Now they get their name because when pissed off, they have been known to chase people down for more than a quarter mile. And on top of that, their stings are very painful. These bees are also aggressive towards other bees as well. So it puts them at risk, and now we're kinda just stuck with them. In our 6th spot today, we have the human mouse. In the late 90s, 3 doctors started doing experiments to try and create human body parts in a lab. One of these experiments involved growing a human ear on the back of a mouse. So they did this by creating an ear-shaped scaffolding and putting cells of cartilage from a cow on it. They then put the mouse under anesthetic and placed this ear under its skin. Crazily enough, the mouse's body fed the cow cartilage cells. The scaffolding dissolved and the mouse grew this artificial shape of a human ear. But it was only the outside of an ear. Okay, it didn't work, there was no eardrum. Now you might be wondering why they did this. Well, their hope is that this will help plastic surgeons when reconstructing human ears for their patients. So they would create this ear on the mouse and then graft it onto the person. So you'd have an ear that is part mouse, part cow. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the goat with human milk. I swear I didn't make this up, it's real and I'm a little disturbed. But basically, scientists have figured a way for goats to produce human breast milk. They did this by transferring human breast milk enzymes and proteins into goat embryos. In the end, they found that the milk the goats were producing wasn't 100% human, but it contained 60% of the lysosome and lactoferrin found in human milk. Now, why do they want goats producing human breast milk? Well, it could feed and save babies in need. Plus, it would have a longer shelf life. Would you try this milk? Let me know in the comments below. I've heard breast milk is pretty sweet, but I don't think I want to try it. Coming in at number 4, we have the Belgian super cow. Now, you guys know how much I love cows. And if you didn't know, then hi, my name is Lindsay and I love cows. But this thing is terrifying. It's monstrous, okay? It's super ripped and it's just massive. The Belgian super cows were created back in the 1800s when Belgian scientists and farmers mixed native cattle with shorthorn cattle. Then over the time, they would select the biggest and strongest offsprings of each variety and then breed them together. So on and so on, bam! You got a super cow, which is definitely the biggest and strongest, and I understand why they call it the super cow. Like, just look at this beast, okay? It could crush anyone. In our third spot, we have the ENVROPIG. So pig waste is actually pretty toxic. I mean, if you've seen the Simpsons movie, then you'd know all about it. I mean, that was a bit of an exaggeration, but still. Anyways, pig's waste contains really high levels of phosphorus. This phosphorus ends up in lakes and rivers and oceans and can cause a boom of algae. So scientists were trying to come up with a way for pigs to have less toxic waste, hence the creation of the ENVROPIG. ENVROPIGs are pigs with up to 65% less phosphorus in their excrements. This pig was first created in 1999 at the University of Guelph's Farm in Canada. This pig had its phytase gene attached to a piece of mouse DNA. Now, it's really complicated to explain, but here's an explanation, and I quote, "The genetically altered pig was created using genetic material from a mouse and an E. coli bacterium to reduce phosphorus in the pig's feces. In the end, it made the pig excrete fewer pollutants." Moving on to number 2, we have the pig with human blood. Now, you're probably noticing a trend by now. Pigs and mice are the scientists' test subjects of choice. Researchers at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota have managed to create pigs made out of human blood. So the pigs have human blood pumping through their veins. Not only that, but some of the cells in the blood merge together to create pig-human cell hybrids. Now, the reason behind this all is to allow scientists to study how viral infections can transfer from animals to humans. And in our number 1 spot today, we have Oliver the chimp. In the 1970s, there was a performing chimpanzee that received a lot of attention. His name was Oliver. Now, Oliver was really different from other chimps for a number of reasons. The main being that Oliver might have been a successful mix between a human and a chimp. Yeah, you heard me. A lot of doctors and scientists are convinced that Oliver was a humanzee. It's believed that they inseminated a female chimp with male sperm, and Oliver was the offspring. Now let's take a look at the facts. Oliver didn't look like other chimps. In fact, he had a more human-like appearance. He had a flatter face than other chimpanzees, and he walked on 2 feet instead of all 4s. He also preferred human females over female chimpanzees, and he understood humans very well. So could it be that Oliver was actually half human, half chimp?